"This is an active search and rescue operation," I announced, my voice carrying with surprising authority across the placid water of Serenity Shores. I was sitting in a vessel that had all the structural integrity of a party balloon, powered by a motor that made less noise than a nervous cricket. From the shore, Officer Schmidt, a man whose weary posture suggested he'd seen every possible permutation of suburban absurdity, pinched the bridge of his nose. His younger partner, Officer Miller, just looked confused, his hand hovering uncertainly near his notepad, as if unsure what ordinance a man in an inflatable boat could possibly be violating. "A what?" shrieked the source of all this chaos. "Brenda." Her name was Brenda, but in my head she was a legion of titles. She-wolf of suburbia, Baroness of the bylaws, the final boss of next door. She stood on the edge of the now infamous community boat ramp, a thick industrial chain hanging limply behind her like a vanquished foe. Her face was a vibrant, pulsating shade of magenta, her hands clutching a clipboard to her chest, as if it were a holy shield. "A rescue operation?" she spat, her voice cracking. "That's a pool toy." "This," I said, patting the rubberized side of the mighty duck, "is a U.S. Coast Guard-compliant rapid deployment recovery skiff, and I am rendering aid to a citizen in distress. Young Timmy over there." I pointed with my oar toward my neighbor Dave's kid, who was playing his part beautifully by looking tragically towards the water, lost his drone, a valuable piece of submersible electronic equipment. It's a potential navigational hazard for, other pool toys. Officer Schmidt's shoulders started to shake. He turned his head to cough, but I knew. That was the sound of a man desperately trying to suppress a laugh that could cost him his pension. Brenda, however, was not laughing. If looks could kill, my inflatable skiff would have been shredded into confetti. Now you're probably wondering how, on this glorious Saturday morning, I ended up in a standoff involving a deflated sense of community, an inflated sense of self-importance, and a literal inflatable boat. It's a wild tale of rules, rebellion, and ridiculously over-engineered revenge, and it all started less than 5 minutes ago. The day had begun with the promise of perfection. It was the first truly warm Saturday of the year, the kind of day that smells like freshly cut grass and impending freedom. For me, that freedom smelled like salt, gasoline, and bait. In my garage, my pride and joy, the "see ya later," a pristine 22-foot center console, was hitched to my truck, ready to go. I was in the final stages of the sacred pre-launch ritual, loading the cooler with sandwiches Sarah had made, checking the tackle boxes, and playing classic rock just loud enough to be enjoyable, but, I thought, not loud enough to trigger an HOA incident report. My wife, Sarah, poked her head into the garage. "Got everything?" "Almost," I said, holding up a bag of ice. "The final, most crucial component. A fishing trip without ice is just a sad boat ride with warm beer." "And we can't have that," she said with a grin. "Try not to get too sunburned. And please try not to piss off Brenda." "Me?" I said, feigning innocence. "I'm a model citizen. My garbage can was perfectly perpendicular to the curb this week." Sarah rolled her eyes. Just get out on the water before she finds a new violation. Unapproved level of weekend enthusiasm or something. I laughed, gave her a kiss, and hopped into my truck. We'd bought our house in Serenity Shores 2 years ago. It was a nice, if slightly sterile, suburban development, but it had one magical, shimmering jewel that made it all worth it: a private community boat ramp. For a guy like me, who ran a small marine salvage business, having direct lake access was like having a private tunnel to heaven. The problem was that the tunnel's gatekeeper was Brenda. As HOA president, she wielded her power with the surgical precision of a bored tyrant. She'd managed to get tiki torches banned, fire hazard, basketball hoops outlawed. They detracted from the aesthetic uniformity. and had once measured the length of my neighbor Dave's lawn with a tape measure. She lived in the house directly across from the boat ramp, giving her a perfect perch from which to observe and condemn. I backed my truck out, the boat trailer rolling smoothly behind me. The 150-yard drive to the ramp was filled with giddy anticipation. I could already feel the sun on my face, the gentle rock of the waves. I turned the final corner and my heart stopped. Stretched across the entrance to the ramp was a thick, zinc-plated chain, held together by a padlock the size of a fist. And stuck to a wooden post, sealed in the smug, weatherproof sheen of professional lamination, was a sign. The font was a flowery, offensive script, probably called Smug Housewife. Notice: by order of the Serenity Shores HOA Board, this boat ramp is temporarily closed for a full safety and liability audit. Unauthorized use will be subject to maximum fines. Brenda M., President. I stared at it. I read it 3 times. Temporarily closed. In HOA speak, that meant until the sun burns out and the cockroaches inherit the earth. Safety and liability audit. That was code for, I saw a teenager do a cannonball last summer and it disturbed my begonias. This wasn't a notice. It was a declaration of war. My entire Saturday, my entire season, was being held hostage by a laminated piece of paper. I could feel her eyes on me from her living room window, a faint shimmer of movement behind the curtains. She was watching, savoring this. My blood went from a simmer to a rolling boil. I could fight her. I could spend months arguing in HOA meetings, circulating petitions, engaging in the soul-crushing trench warfare of suburban politics. Or a slow, dangerous grin spread across my face. I put the truck in reverse, backed the see ya later into my driveway with a conspicuous air of defeat, and unhitched it. I watched her curtain twitch again. Good, I thought. She thinks she's won. I walked into the house, my mind racing. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, seeing my face. "You're back already." "The she-wolf of suburbia has blockaded the port," I said, grabbing my keys. "Brenda, what did she do?" "She chained the ramp, laminated sign and everything. It's official." "What are you going to do? You've been planning this fishing trip for weeks." "Oh, I'm going to launch a boat," I said. "Just not that boat. Get the binoculars from the hall closet. You're going to want to watch this from the upstairs window." I strode back to the garage, a man on a mission. Tucked away behind the lawnmower was my secret weapon. It was an 8-foot inflatable skiff I used for getting to salvage jobs in shallow water. It weighed about 50 pounds and was, technically, a boat. I grabbed the small electric trolling motor that clipped onto the back, a life vest, and, for dramatic effect, an extendable boat hook and a grappling hook from my work truck. My plan needed one more piece to be perfect, to be unimpeachable. I walked across my lawn to where my neighbor Dave's 10-year-old son, Timmy, was kicking at the grass, looking dejected. "Hey, Timmy, what's wrong, bud?" "My drone," he mumbled, pointing a heartbroken finger toward the lake. "A gust of wind took it, and it went into the water right over there. It's waterproof, but I can't reach it." I knelt down and put a hand on his shoulder, my face a mask of solemn duty. "Timmy, that sounds like a maritime emergency. Don't you worry. I have a vessel certified for just such a rescue." The stage was set. I walked, not drove, down to the ramp, carrying the deflated skiff under one arm and a portable pump in the other. I stepped right around the end of Brenda's mighty chain, stood on the concrete ramp, and began inflating the boat. The high-pitched whine of the electric pump was the sound of righteous defiance. I dramatically donned my life vest, clipped on the motor, and slid the mighty duck into the water. The entire operation, from the moment I entered my house to the moment the boat's hull kissed the lake, took exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Which brings us back to where we started. Me, in a boat the size of a bathtub, facing down a furious HOA president and two increasingly amused police officers. "So," Officer Schmidt said, his voice laced with the kind of forced patience that takes decades to cultivate. "You launched this recovery skiff to retrieve the boy's drone." "Correct, officer," I said. With a flourish, I used the boat hook to snag the drone, which was bobbing just below the surface. I lifted it high in the air like it was the sword in the stone. "Mission accomplished. The waterway is now clear of electronic navigational hazards." A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, drawn by the drama. A few of them, including Dave, let out a smattering of applause. Timmy cheered. Brenda's magenta face deepened to a furious plum. "He's making a mockery of the rules. He's trespassing." Officer Schmidt sighed, the sound of 1,000 shattered dreams. "Ma'am, he walked around the chain. He didn't break your lock. The common area isn't closed, and technically," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching, "he wasn't launching a trailered vehicle. There's nothing we can do." He turned to me. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you'd conclude your rescue operations, so we can all get on with our Saturday." "Absolutely, officer," I said with a crisp two-finger salute. I paddled the Mighty Duck back to the ramp, giving Brenda a wide, cheerful berth. As I deflated my noble vessel, the cops got back in their car. Before he closed his door, Officer Schmidt caught my eye and gave me a slow, almost imperceptible nod. The battle was won, but as I watched Brenda storm back to her house, her clipboard held so tight her knuckles were white, I knew the war was just beginning, and it was going to be glorious. The first volley of the HOA's counteroffensive arrived not with a bang, but with a flurry of passive-aggressive emails. Brenda, it turned out, was a maestro of bureaucratic warfare. 2 days after the inflatable incident, as it came to be known, every resident of Serenity Shores received a notification for an emergency session of the board to address urgent safety protocol revisions. Sarah and I read the minutes of the meeting over dinner. It was a masterpiece of petty tyranny. "You've got to be kidding me," Sarah said, scrolling through the PDF on her tablet. "She actually passed these?" "Read them out loud," I said, taking a long sip of beer. "I want to hear the music of her madness." Sarah cleared her throat and read in a deadpan voice. "Rule 7B, subsection 4A. To ensure ramp integrity, a 500-pound minimum dry weight is now required for any and all watercraft utilizing the community ramp. Goodbye. Inflatable skiffs, kayaks, and paddleboards," I mused. "So much for the community part of the community ramp." "It gets better," she said. Rule 7B, subsection 4B. All ramp usage must be pre-scheduled with the Architectural Review Committee at least 48 hours in advance, pending approval. The Architectural Review Committee? That's Brenda, her husband Gary, and a woman who thinks garden gnomes are a gateway to lawn anarchy. "And here's my personal favorite," Sarah said, a grin playing on her lips. Rule 7B, subsection 5. The launching of any vessel for purposes deemed by the board to be salvage, rescue, or non-recreational recovery is strictly prohibited without a commercial permit, a $500 HOA bond, and a signed affidavit from the assisted party. I threw my head back and laughed. It was so specific, so targeted, so utterly insane. She literally wrote a law against me saving a kid's drone. She can't just invent commercial bylaws for a residential zone, Sarah, my wonderful paralegal-brained wife, pointed out. This is so far beyond her authority. It's completely unenforceable. Enforceable or not, she thinks she's built a fortress around that ramp. She thinks she's won. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my backyard. It was a decent size, sloping gently down toward the water. My property line, I knew from the survey when we bought the place, extended 15 feet past the retaining wall, out into the lake itself. An idea, a beautiful, terrible, breathtakingly expensive idea, began to form in my mind. "Fighting her in a meeting is playing on her turf," I said softly. "You can't win a land war in Asia, and you can't out-bureaucrat a bored housewife with a clipboard. You have to change the battlefield." "What are you thinking?" Sarah asked, walking up behind me. I pointed out the window. "I'm thinking, I'll make her precious community ramp completely and utterly irrelevant." That night I didn't sleep. I was a man possessed, fueled by coffee and spite. I pulled out our property surveys, the city zoning maps, the original development plans for Serenity Shores. I cross-referenced county building codes and state environmental regulations regarding shoreline construction. And there it was, clear as day in black and white. According to the city of Northwood, not the independent Republic of Brenda, I was perfectly within my rights to build a private dock or boat ramp on my own property, as long as I adhered to certain environmental and structural standards. The next morning I told Sarah my plan. She listened patiently, a thoughtful expression on her face. "A boat ramp," she said, testing the words. "Your own private boat ramp. In our backyard." Concrete, reinforced, with a gentle, perfect grade. Maybe some nice guideposts, a solar-powered winch. "It's going to cost a fortune." "It's an investment in our property value," I countered, "and more importantly, an investment in my sanity." She was quiet for a long moment. I held my breath. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "Okay," she said. "But if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. By the book. Every permit, every inspection, we give her no ammunition." My first call wasn't to a contractor. It was to the marina, to a grizzled old mechanic I knew. "Mac," I said, "I need a guy, a builder, someone who isn't afraid of a little HOA friction." Mac grunted. "You need Gus." "Gus who?" "Just Gus. Works for himself, hates rules more than he hates rust. I'll give him your number. If he's interested, he'll call. If not, you'll never hear from him." 2 days later, my phone rang. A gravelly voice on the other end said, "This is Gus. Mac said you had a job that wasn't boring." We agreed to meet at a Greasy Spoon diner halfway between our houses. Gus was a mountain of a man in his 60s, with a wild gray beard and hands that looked like they could crush granite into dust. He sat hunched over a black coffee, looking at me from under a brow so bushy it could have housed a family of birds. I laid it all out for him. The chained ramp, the inflatable skiff, Brenda, the bylaws, and finally, my grand vision for a private ramp in my backyard. I pushed the survey and my preliminary sketches across the sticky table. Gus listened without saying a word, his expression unreadable. He studied the plans, his finger tracing the property line. When I finished, the silence stretched on for a full minute. I was starting to think I'd misjudged him. Finally, he looked up from the papers, a dangerous glint in his eye. "You want to build a boat ramp on your own property because the lady with the clipboard chained up the neighborhood one?" "That's the short version," I said. "And you got the city permits?" "I'll have them by the end of the week." He slapped his giant hand on the table, making the salt shaker jump. A slow, magnificent grin spread across his face, revealing a few missing teeth. "Son," he boomed, his voice like rocks tumbling downhill. "I have been waiting for a job like this my entire life. When do we start?" The permit war, as Sarah and I called it, was a study in contrasts. The city planning office was a place of beige walls and bored but efficient bureaucrats. I went in armed with my plans, my environmental impact statement, and a polite attitude. They reviewed my documents, asked a few clarifying questions about drainage and material composition, and 10 days later I walked out with a thick packet of approved permits. It was beautifully, blessedly boring. The HOA, on the other hand, was the epicenter of high drama. Brenda must have had spies everywhere, because the day after the surveyor came to stake out the construction zone, the first official-looking letter arrived. It was from the Serenity Shores Architectural Review Committee, and informed me that a significant, unapproved landscaping alteration had been detected on my property. It demanded I cease all activity immediately. Following Sarah's advice, I crafted a polite, formal response. I thanked the committee for their diligence, attached a copy of the city-approved survey, and highlighted the section of the HOA's own governing documents that stated all rules were subordinate to city ordinances. I was building a paper trail. The letters from Brenda became more frantic. One cited a violation of shoreline aesthetics. My response included a copy of my permit from the State Department of Environmental Protection. Another threatened a fine for potential construction noise. My response included a printout of the city's noise ordinance, with the legal hours for construction, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., helpfully circled in yellow highlighter. The day before construction was set to begin, the final email arrived. It was a long, rambling screed from Brenda, personally threatening lawsuits, liens on my house, and public shaming in the community newsletter for my flagrant disregard for the peaceful character of our neighborhood. I printed it out, put it in a cheap black frame, and hung it on a nail in my garage. It was my motivation. The next morning, at 7:01 a.m. exactly, a low rumble shook our house. I grabbed my coffee and went to the front window. A massive flatbed truck was slowly backing down our quiet cul-de-sac. On its bed sat the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. A bright yellow Caterpillar excavator. Windows slid open all up and down the street. Neighbors emerged in bathrobes, clutching coffee mugs, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Dave, my next-door neighbor, caught my eye from his porch and gave me a slow, deliberate thumbs up. And then there was Brenda. She appeared on her front lawn as if summoned by the diesel fumes. She was holding her phone, her face a perfect mask of horror. This wasn't a skirmish anymore. I had just parked a tank on her perfectly manicured lawn. She marched across the street, her pink velour tracksuit a vibrant beacon of rage. Gus was directing the excavator operator as he expertly unloaded the machine onto the street. "What is the meaning of this?" Brenda shrieked over the engine's roar. "You cannot bring that monster in here!" Gus, a master of passive aggression, simply cupped a hand to his ear, shrugged, and mouthed, "Can't hear ya." Of course, she called the police. 10 minutes later, the familiar patrol car rolled up. Out stepped Officer Miller and, God bless him, Officer Schmidt. Schmidt took one look at the excavator, one look at the permits I was holding out for him, one look at Brenda's furious face, and let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all human conflict. "Ma'am," he said, not even trying to hide his exasperation, "I've looked at the permits. They are all in order. This is a civil matter between you and him. It's not a police issue." "But he's destroying the neighborhood!" she wailed. I gave her my most pleasant smile. "I'm improving my property, Brenda. Think of the resale value." Schmidt just shook his head and got back in the car. As they drove away, I saw him say something to Miller, and they both burst out laughing. The cops were gone. Brenda stood defeated on the sidewalk. Gus looked at me and gave a single, sharp nod. I nodded back. The operator climbed into the cab, swung the big hydraulic arm around, and lowered the bucket. Then, with a thunderous crunch that echoed through the morning air, he took the first giant scoop of earth from my backyard. It was the opening shot, the D-Day landing, the point of no return. And it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The construction of the Great Ramp of Spite became the neighborhood's primary source of live entertainment. The next few weeks devolved into a masterclass in petty guerrilla warfare. Brenda, having lost the legal battle of the permits, pivoted to a strategy of unadulterated annoyance. Her first move was the noise complaint. Every single day at 4:55 p.m., she would call the police to complain that the crew was working past the 5 p.m. cutoff. Gus, in turn, began a ritual of shutting down every piece of machinery at exactly 4:59 p.m., then having his crew sit in their trucks, engines off, until 5:01 p.m. before leaving. He also made a point of starting the loudest piece of equipment, the generator, at precisely 7:01 a.m. Brenda escalated. She began a campaign of photographic espionage, stationing herself at her upstairs window with a telephoto lens, documenting every move. We'd see the glint of the sun off the lens as she tracked the cement mixer. Sarah, who was now fully invested as my strategic advisor, came up with the perfect countermeasure. "You know that motion-activated sprinkler head you bought for the garden?" she asked one evening. "The one we never used?" The next morning I installed it on a stake near the property line, aimed it just right, and adjusted the sensitivity. The first time Brenda crept along the edge of her yard to get a better angle with her camera, she was met with a sudden, powerful blast of water. She let out a yelp and scurried back into her house, sputtering. After the third time, the photographic surveillance mysteriously ceased. The neighborhood began to choose sides. The pro-ramp faction was led by Dave, who started a morning ritual of bringing Gus's crew a large box of coffee and donuts. Mrs. Henderson from 3 doors down, a sweet old lady who Brenda had once fined for excessive wind chimes, would bring them lemonade in the afternoon. They became our silent, smiling allies. The anti-ramp faction, Brenda's few loyal disciples, would simply glare. They'd drive past my house extra slowly, shaking their heads in theatrical disapproval. One of them, a man who waxed his driveway, took to standing on his lawn and just staring at the construction site for hours, as if his disapproval alone could halt the project. Brenda's boldest move was parking. She started parking her massive Lincoln Navigator on the street, always legally, but always in the most inconvenient spot possible, making it a nightmare for the large cement and gravel trucks to maneuver down our cul-de-sac. Gus retaliated with surgical precision. One afternoon, his ancient, rust bucket of a pickup truck broke down right in front of Brenda's driveway. He couldn't possibly move it, he explained to her with a shrug. The part he needed wouldn't be in until the next day. She was completely boxed in. The sight of her having to take a taxi to her weekly book club meeting was, Dave later told me, a moment of pure, unadulterated joy for the entire street. The ramp was taking shape. It was a thing of beauty, a monument to defiance. The wooden forms were built, the rebar was laid in a thick, cross-hatched grid. It was ridiculously over-engineered. Gus claimed it could support a World War II landing craft. I believed him. The day of the concrete pour was a major event. 2 massive cement trucks rumbled down the street, and the pro-ramp neighbors came out onto their lawns to watch. It felt like a parade. The concrete flowed down the chute, a thick gray river that filled the forms and solidified my victory. Gus and his crew expertly smoothed the surface, giving it a perfect, non-slip texture. As the concrete cured under thick plastic sheeting, an unfamiliar calm settled over the neighborhood. There were no more trucks, no more noise. Brenda remained inside her house, ominously quiet. We were in the home stretch. I had won. Or so I thought. The calm lasted for 4 days. It was the calm before the storm. Brenda had not been idle. She had been digging, deep into the archives. The knock on the door came on a Thursday afternoon. It wasn't a cop or a neighbor. It was a county sheriff's deputy, looking profoundly apologetic. He handed me a thick envelope. "Sorry, sir," he said. "I'm just the messenger." I opened it, my hands suddenly cold. It was an emergency injunction, a stop work order. All activity on my property was to cease immediately, pending a court hearing. My eyes scanned the legalese until I found the reason. Brenda, in a stroke of diabolical genius, had unearthed a ghost from the past. Buried deep within the HOA's original founding covenants from 1978 was Covenant 11, Section B, Paragraph 4. No permanent alteration to the natural shoreline gradient shall be permitted without a unanimous vote of the board and a majority vote of the homeowners. It was an old, forgotten environmental clause, written by hippies in the Carter administration, designed to prevent the original developer from bulldozing the entire lakefront. It had never been used, never been enforced. It was a legal fossil, and she had resurrected it to use as a weapon. The ramp was 95% complete. It was a perfect, solid structure. But until the concrete was fully cured and sealed, and the final grade of the surrounding soil was finished, it was technically an active construction site. The injunction froze me in place. I stood in my backyard, looking at my magnificent, beautiful, and now completely useless boat ramp. Across the street, Brenda stood on her front porch, arms crossed, a thin, triumphant smile on her face. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. She had found my Death Star's exhaust port. She had beaten me with a 50-year-old piece of paper. I felt a hollow pit in my stomach. I had spent thousands of dollars, weeks of my life, and an ocean of emotional energy on this project. For the first time in this whole ridiculous war, I felt truly and utterly defeated. The next 2 days were bleak. I moped around the house, staring out the window at my concrete white elephant. Sarah tried to cheer me up, talking about legal options and filing motions, but my heart wasn't in it. The fight had gone out of me. The sheer grinding persistence of Brenda's malice had worn me down. On Saturday afternoon, I was sitting on my back porch, nursing a beer and glaring at the ramp, when Dave came over and sat down next to me, handing me a fresh bottle. "Tough break," he said. "She got me on a technicality from the Nixon administration," I grumbled. "Well, Ford, close enough." "So, what now?" Dave asked. "Lawyer up, I guess? It'll take months, years, probably." "Probably," I said, taking a long drink. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the sunlight sparkle on the lake. The lake I couldn't access. The lake that was the whole reason we lived here. Dave gestured with his bottle toward the water. "You know," he said quietly, "she closed your ramp. And she closed the community ramp." He paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. "But she can't close the whole lake." I looked at him, and then I looked at the lake, and then I looked back at him. A tiny spark ignited in the hollow pit of my stomach. It wasn't about my ramp anymore. It was about the principle. "What are you thinking?" I asked. Dave's smile widened. "I'm thinking it's a beautiful day for a party." The plan we hatched was simple, elegant, and completely legal. We weren't going to fight Brenda's injunction. We were going to sidestep it entirely. Sarah drafted a simple flyer, and Timmy, my drone-piloting co-conspirator, helped us deliver one to the mailbox of every neighbor we knew was on our side. The flyer read, "Neighborhood Lake Appreciation Day. This Saturday at 1 p.m. Let's celebrate the beautiful resource we all share. Bring your kayaks, your paddle boards, your floaties, and your coolers. Meet at the community common area, next to the boat ramp. Let's have some fun." The day arrived, bright and sunny. At about 12:45 p.m., I started to get nervous. What if no one showed up? What if it was just me and Dave standing there with a bag of charcoal? Then, at 1 p.m. on the dot, it began. The Hendersons came first, pulling a little red wagon with 2 kayaks and a cooler. Then the family from the end of the block, with 3 kids and a giant inflatable unicorn. then another family, and another. People didn't drive down. They walked, carrying or wheeling their non-motorized, non-500-pound vessels. Kayaks, canoes, stand-up paddleboards, inflatable swans, pool noodles. It was a beautiful, ridiculous, multicolored army of suburbanites reclaiming their waterfront. Dave rolled his massive grill down and fired it up. Someone else put a Bluetooth speaker on a picnic table and started playing inoffensive classic rock. Kids ran around on the grass. People set up lawn chairs. It wasn't a protest. It was a genuine, joyous neighborhood party. They didn't even go near the chained-off ramp. They simply occupied the common area around it, laughing, eating, and enjoying the day. They were following every single rule to the letter. From her window, Brenda watched. For the first hour, she just watched. I could feel the heat of her glare from across the street. This was a public, peaceful, and popular rebellion, and she had no tool in her HOA arsenal to combat it. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She burst out of her house, phone pressed to her ear. We all knew who she was calling. 10 minutes later, the patrol car appeared. For the third and final time, Officers Miller and Schmidt arrived on the scene of our suburban war. Officer Schmidt got out of the car, looking less like a cop and more like a man arriving at the finale of his favorite sitcom. He surveyed the scene: families eating hot dogs, kids chasing a frisbee, a colorful flotilla of plastic boats resting on the grass. Brenda marched up to him, her voice a shrill whistle of rage. "They're trespassing! This is an illegal assembly! They are violating the ramp closure!" Schmidt took a long, slow look around. He nodded at Dave, who was flipping burgers. He looked at me and gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head, as if to say, "I can't believe I'm back here." He turned to Brenda, and his voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "Ma'am, this is a community common area. The people here are residents. They are having a picnic. There is no law against inflatable flamingos." He paused. "You need to go home." For Brenda, this was the final straw. Her authority, the very core of her identity, had been publicly dismissed by the law itself. "I am the law here," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the crowd. And then she snapped. She stormed past the officer, straight toward Dave's grill, and tried to slam the lid shut. Dave, a big, easygoing guy, simply put a hand out and stopped it. Thwarted, she spun around and tried to confiscate a teenager's kayak, physically trying to drag it away from him. It was a complete and total public meltdown. The other two HOA board members, who had come out to see what the commotion was about, saw her unhinged display and visibly backed away, creating a physical distance between themselves and her madness. Her husband, Gary, who rarely made an appearance, came running out of their house, pleading, "Brenda, stop! Just stop!" The entire neighborhood, her supporters and her detractors, saw it all. The Empress had no clothes, and she was currently trying to wrestle an inflatable swan away from a 7-year-old. The Great Serenity Shores flotilla changed everything. The following Monday, an email went out. An emergency HOA meeting had been called, not by Brenda, but by the other two board members. Dave attended and gave me the play-by-play later that evening. It was, he said, a bloodbath. Resident after resident stood up and spoke about Brenda's overreach, her targeted harassment, her general reign of terror. When the vote was called to remove her as president, it was unanimous. She and Gary didn't even show up. The new president, a reasonable woman named Carol, who I'd only ever exchanged pleasantries with, made her first motion: to permanently strike Covenant 11B from the bylaws. Her second motion was to immediately reopen the community boat ramp. Both passed with a cheer from the gallery. The next day the chain was gone. My injunction was formally dropped. I called Gus. "The war is over," I said. "We won." I heard him let out a gravelly chuckle on the other end of the line. Good, he said. I'll have my boys out tomorrow to finish the job. They came and sealed the concrete, graded the surrounding yard, and even laid down fresh sod. When I tried to give Gus a generous tip on top of his final payment, he waved it away. Nah, he said, looking at my finished ramp with the pride of a sculptor. Watching that woman's face when she lost it, that was payment enough for me. A month later, on another perfect Saturday morning, the christening was held. It was just me, Sarah, Dave, and Gus standing on my beautiful, private, over-engineered boat ramp. Sarah broke a bottle of cheap champagne over the side of the trailer winch. We weren't about to damage the pristine concrete. And we officially named the structure the Ramp of Reasonable Recourse. I backed the See Ya Later down its smooth, perfect grade. The boat slid off the trailer and into the water with a gentle splash. The engine fired up on the first try. Victory. As we idled out into the lake, the sun warm on our faces, we looked back at the shore. The community ramp was bustling. Families were launching ski boats and fishing pontoons. Kids were laughing. It was alive again. And next to it, my ramp stood as a quiet, concrete monument to the fact that sometimes you have to fight for your right to go fishing. Then, Sarah pointed. Oh my God, look. Way down the shoreline, near the public access point 2 miles away, 2 small figures were laboriously paddling a little tandem kayak. They had to pay for parking and drag their boat across 100 yards of sand just to get on the water. It was Brenda and Gary. She saw us. I could feel her glare even from 100 yards away. It was a look of pure, undiluted hatred. I smiled. I didn't gloat or wave or make a scene. I just gave a simple, friendly 2-finger wave from the helm. Sarah squeezed my hand, laughing. You know, I said, pushing the throttle forward and turning the See Ya Later toward the wide-open water. I think I'm really going to like it here.